Sorry. Let's just look at the differences between the three foams. So the mattress foam, as you can see, is just like a slightly thinner version of this, but it's still really soft and spongy. You can still get a lot of movement in it. The Plastizote is a much higher density foam, but it's not an HD foam because we do have a high density foam as well. So this is still a soft density foam, but it's much more condensed than this. It's not as spongy, you don't get as much room for movement. So you need to think about what you want to achieve, and that's when you would use the different foams. So sometimes this is quite good for structures that come right off the body. So we wouldn't necessarily want to apply this in a similar way. We wouldn't want to cut a shape and then just cut a shape with the foam and then stitch that very flat shape on. Okay? Because that's not what this foam is for. This type of foam is a type of foam that what you want to do is make a three-dimensional structure. So if we had a circle like this, if we wanted to do this, we would never use it for a stomach, but this is the idea. We would cut the circle, but we'd also cut darts in it, glue the darts together, and that would give us something that was quite bulbous. So there'd be a lot of air between the body and the actual sheet of foam. So it's about structures. So you can do that coming out from legs. So legs can get quite big. Bottoms of legs, shoulders. So it's about darting it, gluing it together, and then attaching it to the body. But because this foam is denser, and that foam and this foam as well, we don't sew foam. So you have to cover the foam first with your lycra. So you use your pattern that you make this from, cut it exactly the same in the lycra, and then you can sew the lycra straight onto the body, so using your stretch stitch, and it's what holds your foam in place. So this just sits in between two sheets of your lycra, and then that attaches on. But as I say, it's a dimensional. You're not using it to pad up shapes the same way as you would use a soft foam. You're using it to create something the opposite way. We do have more of this coming, so I'm just going to cut a little tiny bit and show you what I mean. Glue guns, if you do want to use this, are really great for Plastizote. So we would never use it to pad something like this. That's not how we use this foam, because it doesn't really give us any padding. But you can, obviously in a much more careful and calculated fashion, create dimensional shapes. And we'd use the glue gun just along the edges here and here, so hot glue there and there, and hold them together until the glue sets, and that would give us a shape. Before you do that, you would cut it out, use this as your pattern in your lycra. Normally I would just cut round, leaving maybe about 1 centimetre round the overall shape, not cutting into my darts, and then just slit into my darts and pull it back. You then use your spray glue. Oh, sorry. Your spray glue on that, and that will attach that so that it's nice and smooth. And you can stick these bits back, and then you'd have your other bit over the top. Hand sew around it. You would never really do anything this small. You're talking big panel. Hand sew around the edge of it, and then attach it onto your bodysuit. So this is a really good, easy way to get those shapes up and off the body with a bit of space and keep it nice and light. So that's how we use that foam. We don't build it up in layers. The mattress foam is different, of course, as well as the other foam. It's slightly different. We do use this to build up shapes and layers in the same ways we've done this kind of thing. I wouldn't necessarily use this for a stomach. I wouldn't use it for a soft fat suit, but you might want to use it for a muscle suit, something that's a bit harder, that needs a bit more definition. Can be cut with your scissors really easily. What will I do? And obviously if you're using a muscle suit, this is when you really, really need to be using your reference to make sure you cut your muscles in the right shapes. You can layer this up as well. So I could take this and cut another section and glue it over the top so that it becomes much thicker, if you prefer to work in the thinner foam. Or you can carve this down with your blades to give you a dimensional smooth shape that you want. Okay? So it just depends on what area that you're working with. Always, even if you're only working with it this thick, you always need to trim off that line. Again, it doesn't need to be beautifully neat. You can spend hours trying to make it beautifully neat, but it doesn't make any difference really. So you just want to trim off that edge. And that's just going to give us a slightly smoother line. Now, sometimes in industry, a lot of people would just take this and cover it straight in foam. Cover it straight in lycra or your stretch fabric. I tend to think that's still a little bit hard, just on the edges there. So in order just to smooth that down, you can use a small section of wadding as well. A lot of people use ice wool. First use might not be, not seen the ice wool before. Ice wool is really expensive. We use it a lot in millinery. I find it's quite expensive when it comes to doing suits like this. Emma uses ice wool an awful lot even in suits like this. I just use a thin leather wadding, just tear it up, it's a bit cheaper. But that's just going to smooth off some of those edges for me as well. Obviously you cut that a little bit into and I've cut it. So you want a thin layer of wadding, so you can separate off that wadding. And if you've got a nice sheet of paper, and then you down on your table, then you can glue that. I'm just going to glue it on the leg at the moment. Again, it's best to work with your fabric ironed, unlike me. And this is the thing when people say to you, it doesn't matter how it looks on the opposite side, no one's ever going to see it because you're going to sew it on. And they're absolutely right, it doesn't make any difference what it looks like on the other side. No one is ever going to see it. Sometimes I get a little bit funny about it and try to make it look really neat, but no one is ever going to see it, so it doesn't have to at all. So this is our top side, this side that we've carved off the edge on. Again, this should be contact adhesive. Because there's quite a lot of you using this today, you will need to use masks. If you only use it a tiny bit, it's fine. Just going to stick those two bits together. If you're on a curve, and this is what, down pierce. When you're on a curve, you need to make sure you cut in, just so it goes round nice and smoothly. You really don't need as much over as that, but some people think this is like quick costuming. It can be really quick, but sometimes doing a padded suit to the level that I work with my padding, it can take me maybe 4 days straight padding. Just sit with my dummy doing it, and that's without the covering. Because once the covering goes onto your padding, you sometimes need to go back into it and stab stitch into it so that you get the definition back as well. So actually it's not particularly quick costuming at all, really. And again, as I say, I could have built that up with layers, concentric layers that were all slightly smaller than each other to give myself a much more rounded shape, or make it much thicker. Or if I was working with a mussel, I could do that with a little bit of wadding on top of it. I could use the foam if I wanted to get a much bigger suit, and then do some layers of wadding on top of that to smooth it off, to get a bit of definition as well. So that stops you having to do 20 layers, because the thickness of the foam, especially if you're using 1.5 inches, this is a little bit thinner, it would take you a good 4 or 5 layers of wadding to get to that stage. So you could use the foam first and then wad on top of it to give you that definition as well, if you just needed a little bit of extra. Let's bring it back to them. You can cut this right down, you don't need quite as much. Sometimes it's good to have a little bit extra. Yeah.
Can I just check it? Sort it out for me.
Lindsay fixed it.
Oh, Lindsay, why are you talking that?
My fault.
So obviously if you use the contact adhesive, this will be quite a permanent bond. Spray both sides, and it really does stick. The stuff that we're using today is not quite as firm, but it gives you an idea of how to actually do the technique. You can also go back in and spray these little bits that are sticking out and make that a little bit smoother. You can get a bit of a pull on your stretch as well. And then this is a bum pad. So I would pin that on now, and then I'd use a stretch stitch again on the lacquer just to pull that and stretch it on. It could be like a nice shoulder muscle pull, obviously. So you can see how this can start to build up a kind of basic shape for you to work from, especially if you're working with a muscle suit. You get a little bit more definition, or a couple more layers of the foam when you're working with that. So you can either carve this down to a curved shape or build the flatter foam up with a few more layers of it as well. Okay, thanks Lindsay.